In the small town, everyone knew old Mr. Augusto. A quiet man, slow in his steps, distant in his gaze, but carrying a story no one really knew. For decades he lived alone in that dark wooden house, more a relic than a home. Its windows creaked, the walls bore cracks of time, and the rusted iron gate testified to years of neglect. Yet it was there he spent his days, silently watching life go by. When news broke that Augusto had decided to donate his house for a charity auction, the community froze. It wasn't just about money, it was the mystery. Why would such a withdrawn man, with no heirs, give away the last thing he owned? To many, it felt like a farewell, an unspoken testament hidden in plain sight. The announcement came suddenly, without explanation. A simple sign on the gate. Property available for charity auction. Neighbors whispered like detectives piecing together a puzzle. Some claimed he had lost his mind. Others suspected he'd been tricked by lawyers or institutions. But those who knew Augusto understood. He was no fool. His tired eyes always hid more than they revealed. Nothing he did was ever random. The auction drew attention from outsiders, curious not just about the house, but about the enigma it carried. People felt as if the property wasn't just bricks and wood, but a message waiting to be uncovered. The donation didn't look like charity at all. It looked like bait. Like Augusto wanted someone to step inside that house and stumble into the secret he had locked away. In the days before the auction, Augusto carried himself differently. His slow walk had a strange grace to it, as if he were finally releasing a burden. He didn't look like a man losing his only possession, but like one fulfilling a mission. Curious neighbors tried to corner him, asking questions, but his replies were riddles. Everything has its time. Or, some stories must be told differently. The ambiguity only fueled gossip. Some whispered the house was cursed. Others swore he had treasure hidden beneath the floors. Rumors of crimes even surfaced. But Augusto only smiled faintly, watching them spin tales. For him, the truth was heavier than gold, and it wasn't his to bury anymore. Donating the house was not about letting go. It was about opening a curtain, and he had been waiting a lifetime for that performance to begin. When the official announcement appeared in the regional papers, interest exploded. Real estate agencies called, investors lined up. The sleepy town turned into a stage for speculation, but Augusto refused private offers. It must be a public auction, he insisted, his voice steady, his smile unreadable. It felt ritualistic, as if he wanted fate itself to decide who would inherit his legacy. The townsfolk split in opinion. Some applauded his generosity, others condemned his madness. Yet no one could deny the unease. This wasn't just a house. It was a domino piece he was tipping over, a move designed to spark a chain reaction that none of them could stop. When the official announcement appeared in the regional papers, interest exploded. Real estate agencies called, investors lined up. The sleepy town turned into a stage for speculation, but Augusto refused private offers. It must be a public auction, he insisted, his voice steady, his smile unreadable. It felt ritualistic, as if he wanted fate itself to decide who would inherit his legacy. The townsfolk split in opinion. Some applauded his generosity, others condemned his madness, yet no one could deny the unease. This wasn't just a house. It was a domino piece he was tipping over, a move designed to spark a chain reaction that none of them could stop. Among the crowd at the auction, one face stood out with quiet hope. Rafael, a man in his early 30s filled with determination. He wasn't a millionaire, nor an investor chasing profit, but someone longing for a home, a place to rebuild. To him, old houses were not ruins. They were living memories, scars of time carved into walls. When he raised his hand to bid, a shiver ran down his spine. He thought he was only buying property. He didn't know he was stepping into fate's design. Rafael had prepared for this moment for years. He saved every penny, sacrificing luxuries others took for granted. New cars, exotic trips, fancy dinners. To him, the house meant more than shelter. It was proof of resilience, a personal monument after years of uncertainty. Friends thought him foolish for chasing a crumbling relic, but he didn't see decay. He saw potential. Where others saw dust, he saw history. While bidders fought for profit, Rafael fought for belonging. That was the fire that carried him to the final bid. When the gavel fell and the auctioneer declared Raphael the winner, the room buzzed with disbelief. Few expected him to endure the financial weight of competition, but determination beat speculation. Augusto, the old man, watched the scene with eyes that gleamed, not of loss, but of triumph. For him, this wasn't a transaction. It was a handover, a passing of something sacred. Raphael, overwhelmed, barely realized the burden he had inherited. He thought he had bought a house. In truth, he had become keeper of a story that would echo beyond his own life. Driving home that night, Raphael felt a thrill tangled with unease. It wasn't the fear of renovation costs, but something deeper. It felt less like he had chosen the house, and more like the house had chosen him. The image of Augusto's faint smile haunted him, a smile not of farewell, but of release, as if the old man had waited precisely for someone like Raphael. With every thought, the weight grew heavier. The keys he held would not only open doors of wood, but doors of secrets. When the keys touched his palm, Raphael held them like a prize. They were more than cold metal, they were destiny. Unlocking the rusted gate for the first time, he felt as though he had crossed into another realm. The neighbors watched in silence, their eyes hinting at stories untold. Raphael breathed deeply, ready to restore, ready to live his long-awaited dream. He had no idea the house would soon shift from being his home to being a stage. And on that stage, hidden truths would rise like ghosts, demanding to be seen. Raphael's first days in the house were filled with cleaning and repairs. Each room whispered of age. Dusty portraits, creaking floors, and that unmistakable smell of old wood and damp air. But no matter how many corners he explored, something felt missing. In the library, one bookshelf drew his attention. Heavy, out of place, its base didn't align with the floor. And there, a faint gap, barely visible. He pressed against it, but the shelf refused to move. His heart raced. Was it just a crooked wall? Or had he stumbled on a secret deliberately hidden? Curiosity became obsession. He knocked on panels, listening for hollow echoes, tugged at books hoping for hidden mechanisms. Nothing. Until one night, brushing his hand across the bottom, he felt a tiny latch of metal. With a click, the shelf shifted. His pulse quickened as he pushed the heavy frame aside, revealing a narrow, time-worn wooden door. The air around it was heavy, untouched for decades. It didn't feel like just another room. It felt like a threshold into another world. He hesitated. Minutes passed with him staring at the door, weighing whether to open it. His mind raced. Maybe just an old storage closet. But the silence pressing from within carried a different weight. It wasn't emptiness, but presence, thick and suffocating, as though it held trapped breaths from years past. When he finally turned the handle, it resisted, creaking painfully as it gave way. Darkness yawned from the gap, and with it, a sweet, unsettling odor of paper and sealed memory. Raphael steadied himself and stepped inside. The room was small, suffocating in its density. Windows had been boarded, shutting out any light. Wooden crates lined the walls, and at the center stood a table with an ancient typewriter, dust clinging like frost. Next to it, notebooks stacked high, bound and waiting. Raphael shivered. This wasn't a neglected room, but one deliberately locked away. Every corner screamed intention, as if the room itself had been preserved for a future witness. And now, for reasons he couldn't yet fathom, he had become that witness. Raphael stood frozen, letting the weight of the discovery sink in. This wasn't just a hidden space. It was a time capsule, a silent confession sealed in dust. Every object bore the gravity of withheld truth. Running his fingers along the surfaces, he knew this wasn't abandonment. It was secrecy. Augusto hadn't forgotten this place. He had hidden it for someone to find. And now Raphael was tangled in the mystery, bound to unravel the echoes of a past that refused to stay buried. Inside the secret room, Raphael realized these weren't boxes of forgotten junk. Each crate was sealed with purpose, labeled with dates that stretched across decades. Opening the smallest one, he found leather-bound journals, their pages yellowed but steady with elegant handwriting. They were diaries. Running his fingers across the ink, Raphael shivered. These weren't just words. They were windows into the soul of a man who had lived with secrets too heavy to share. Beside them, bundles of letters tied with faded ribbons waited like silent confessions. The house had finally begun to speak. He spent hours lost in the first pages. The voice was raw, almost painful. Young Augusto speaking to a future reader he knew would one day uncover it all. Memories of strict parents, of loneliness, of fleeting friendships shattered by betrayal. Tucked between the pages were black and white photographs, unknown faces, smiles frozen, eyes heavy with hidden truths. Each photo stared back at Raphael as though time itself had collapsed, as if those eyes recognized him. It was both haunting and irresistible. Among the treasures were old cassette tapes, the static-filled recordings carrying Augusto's voice. He spoke of injustice, of moments when silence was forced upon him, and of transforming grief into testimony. Raphael listened, realizing this was not just personal memory but fragments of a collective story, the town's shadowed history. Augusto recounted family feuds over inheritance, violent quarrels swept under the rug, and secrets that could stain respected names. These weren't memories, they were evidence, dangerous truths preserved under dust. One stack of papers stood out: unsent letters, confessions of love, pleas for forgiveness, denunciations of corruption, some addressed to strangers, others to men of power. It was clear Augusto had lived his life in silence, writing what he could never say aloud. Each unopened envelope was a scar, preserved to outlive him. And for Raphael, reading them felt like inheriting wounds he had never suffered, yet now bore the duty to carry. The room was no archive of nostalgia. It was an arsenal of truths. By the end of the night, surrounded by open boxes and scattered documents, Raphael felt like he was standing in a courtroom of ghosts. Every diary, every tape, every photograph testified to a past demanding recognition. He could no longer escape it. He was part of the story now. This room wasn't just hidden, it was entrusted. Augusto hadn't given away a house. He had given away a lifetime, sealed in ink and tape, waiting for the moment destiny would force it into the light. Among the diaries and letters, Raphael began to see a thread weaving through Augusto's life. Love, but not the serene kind. This was love marked by barriers, absence, and tragedy. The name Clara appeared again and again, written with such tenderness that she seemed alive in the pages. Her eyes were called windows to a future that never came, and her smile, a light extinguished too soon. Clara was the great love of Augusto's youth, and his greatest sorrow. Dozens of unsent letters bore witness, some stained with tears. Clara's story was not just of lost romance, but of cruelty. Her family opposed the relationship fiercely, citing class differences and prejudice. Letters told of threats, of pressure so relentless she was forced into marriage with another man. Raphael found a photograph, Clara on her wedding day, beside her chosen husband. She smiled for the camera, but her eyes told another story, eyes drowning in grief. Augusto described that day as if he had buried her alive. It was the funeral of his own future. But love wasn't his only loss. Tapes and diaries spoke of friends turned rivals, of betrayals within his own bloodline. On one recording, Augusto's voice cracked as he spoke of his older brother who cheated him out of his family inheritance. "I lost my family twice, once to death and again to greed," he whispered. Raphael listened, throat tight. These weren't bitter recollections. They were wounds carved so deeply they still bled decades later. Yet among the grief were softer recollections. Lonely walks at night, imagining conversations that never happened, children that never came to be, celebrations he watched from the shadows, never invited. Solitude itself was a character in Augusto's writings, ever present, heavy. Raphael couldn't help but reflect. How many others had lived the same silent tragedies? How universal were these wounds? The secret room was no longer just a vault of Augusto's past. It was a mirror for anyone who had ever lost love, family, or hope. By then, Raphael felt less like a reader and more like a participant. Augusto's pain awakened his own memories, relationships that failed, goodbyes that cut deep, regrets that never left. The writings spoke to him, building a bridge across generations. But in the grief lay a revelation. Wounds were not only scars, they were testimonies of endurance. Even love torn away left behind proof that he had lived fully. Raphael realized these pages were not weapons meant to destroy, but lanterns meant to guide. And in them, he found beauty in the truth that even broken love had value. As Raphael read deeper, names began to feel uncomfortably familiar. At first, he thought it was coincidence. The town was small, after all. But certain surnames kept resurfacing, tied to betrayal, corruption, forbidden love. One stood out: Ferraz. It was his grandmother's maiden name. His stomach twisted. In the diaries, Augusto wrote of a rivalry with Antonio Ferraz, described as arrogant, powerful, merciless. Raphael realized this wasn't just history, it was his history. The discovery pushed him further. Among the letters, he found one addressed to Helena Ferraz. Its words hinted at secret meetings, a romance burning under the weight of fear. Raphael's hands shook. Helena was his great-grandmother's name. Could Augusto have been tied to her? The thought rattled him. It explained why his family had always skirted questions about the past, why certain names were treated like curses. The silence of generations was breaking, and he was the one forced to hear it. The connections grew heavier with each page. There were mentions of intercepted letters, hidden meetings, and desperate alliances to cover scandal. Raphael remembered his grandmother's cryptic words. The past never lets us go. Now they echoed with painful clarity. His family hadn't been distant observers. They were woven into the very secrets Augusto left behind. The secret room was not meant only to expose one life, but to unravel the tangled roots of many. Raphael no longer saw Augusto as a stranger. His words carried a familiarity that unsettled him. In one passage, Augusto hinted at a child born under shadowed circumstances, unacknowledged but impossible to forget. The vagueness left Raphael breathless. Could it be that his own family tree was entwined with Augusto's bloodline? Questions of identity flooded him. The diaries no longer spoke of history, they spoke of him. At that moment, Raphael realized he hadn't just bought a house. He had inherited a mirror of fate, a key to unlock the truths of not just one man, but his own ancestry. The unexpected connection made the discovery intimate, terrifying. It wasn't Augusto against the world, it was Augusto within his world. The house hadn't chosen him randomly. It held his truth, waiting to be unveiled. And now, there was no turning back. With every page, the burden grew heavier on Raphael's shoulders. This was no longer curiosity, it was duty. Augusto's memories weren't harmless recollections. They were confessions, accusations, truths buried alive now clawing to the surface. Raphael spent sleepless nights poring over the writings, questioning whether to guard them or let them see the light. Names of powerful families appeared again and again. To reveal them would be to destroy reputations, shatter illusions, and bleed old wounds. But to hide them would be to betray the very purpose of their existence. The conflict gnawed at him. Part of him longed to keep the records private, to treat them as a sacred legacy. But another voice whispered louder. Augusto had not written for silence. He had written for revelation. Each line carried intent, demanding a witness. Every time Raphael closed the diaries, the words echoed in his skull, refusing to be silenced. It was as if the old man still lingered, watching, urging him to complete what he had started. There was also the matter of justice. Many of the betrayals and crimes had never faced consequence. Men who had ruined others had died unpunished, their families thriving on stolen fortunes. To hide the truth was to keep injustice alive. To expose it was to risk retribution from those still powerful. At times, Raphael wished he had never opened the hidden door. Ignorance had been safer. But the weight of memory is irreversible. Once uncovered, it becomes a sentence that cannot be undone. Every revelation was a mirror. Augusto's diaries reflected more than one life. They reflected the pain of many. Lost loves, silenced injustices, broken families. Raphael could not separate his own scars from what he read. The room was no longer just a secret chamber. It was both memorial and courtroom, a space where memory demanded to be judged. Deep inside, Raphael knew there was no easy way out. Memory is a burden because it demands choice. He could lock the room again, pretend it had never existed, but the truth was already inside him, burning. Or he could bring it to light and face the wrath of a town that preferred silence. Augusto had not left only records. He had left a moral inheritance. And Raphael, willing or not, was now the heir of a truth too heavy to bury again. For days I saw Augusto's decision as a final act of letting go. An old man, tired of the world, giving up his house, his last connection to everything. But his diaries, they turned that whole idea to dust. Augusto never wanted money. He never cared about being remembered as some great philanthropist. The auction wasn't about charity at all. It was a strategy. A brilliant, desperate strategy. He knew that if he died, his silence would bury the truth along with him. But if he just handed over his journals, they could be destroyed, censored, or just lost, ignored. So, he played a game with fate itself. By donating the house, he set a trap. He guaranteed that someone someday would find the secrets he'd sealed within its walls. One journal entry felt less like a diary and more like a last will and testament. It read, "I do not seek heirs of wealth, but heirs of memory. What remains of me is not measured in coins, but in truths that must outlive me. Whoever finds this room will decide if I am nothing but dust, or if my pain will become voice." My stomach twisted into a knot. This wasn't a coincidence. This was all by design. Augusto hadn't trusted his story to a museum or some official archive. No, he trusted it to destiny, believing that only fate could choose the right person to carry his legacy. The deeper I dug into his writings, the clearer it became. The donation wasn't an act of generosity. It was vengeance. Augusto knew that eventually someone would open that room, unleashing truths sharp enough to cut through the lies that entire families had built their lives upon. His voice, he decided, would echo long after he was gone. "Silence is the accomplice of injustice," he wrote. By turning his home into a vault of revelations, Augusto had guaranteed his own form of poetic justice. My perception of him completely shifted. He wasn't some broken old man giving up. He was a fighter who refused to be silenced, even in death. Giving away his house wasn't a sign of weakness. It was an act of pure defiance. He made sure that the very society that had tried to erase him would be forced to confront his story, even decades later. At that moment, I stopped believing that winning the auction was just a stroke of luck. Augusto had left it to destiny, and somehow, destiny had chosen me. I finally understood. He never wanted pity. He didn't want anyone to feel sorry for his loneliness or his losses. The real reason for the donation was simple, devastating, and undeniable. He wanted to be remembered. He needed the truth to outlive him. The house was never just a shelter. It was a monument, a time bomb of memory, just waiting for the right moment to explode. And now that I had opened it, I wasn't just a homeowner anymore. I was the keeper of a legacy, the one chosen to decide whether silence or truth would win in the end. I felt like I was trapped in a labyrinth with no way out. Augusto's words echoed in my mind, weighing me down like chains. On one side, I felt this powerful urge to honor the old man's memory, to bring his hidden truths into the light. But on the other side, there was fear. A deep, chilling fear of destroying reputations, of provoking powerful families, of painting a giant target on my own back. The journals were no longer just paper and ink. They were explosives, and I was holding the match. Silence became my new companion. Doubt was my prison. My nights turned into a living nightmare. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, hearing Augusto's voice as if he were right there in the room with me. Silence is the accomplice. It was like he was haunting me, demanding that his story be told. But the fear of what would happen to me, it was eating me alive. My friends started to notice how exhausted I looked. They'd ask what was wrong, what was troubling me, but I couldn't say a word. How could I? The secret wasn't just mine anymore. It felt like a shared noose, pulling tighter with every single day that passed. The fear was corroding my sanity. The choice was unbearable. Reveal the truth and face the consequences, or protect myself and betray a dead man's last wish. I kept playing out the scenarios in my head. If I took the journals to the press or a museum, this town would implode. Respected names would be dragged through the mud, powerful alliances would shatter, and families would be forever stained by scandal. Maybe I'd be seen as a hero by some, but I'd more likely be cursed as a villain by many more. But if I stayed silent, I'd be betraying Augusto. I'd be condemning the future to repeat the same injustices of the past. This dilemma wasn't just about morality anymore. It felt existential. No matter what choice I made, I knew my life would never be peaceful again. Truth always demands a price. This conflict took over everything. My work lost all meaning. My friends started to drift away, and the house that once felt like a grand victory, now felt like a prison cell. Every wall seemed to whisper his words. Every corner seemed to hold its breath. There were moments when I seriously thought about just burning it all, reducing the journals, the secrets, all of it, to ash. But then Augusto's voice would echo back in my mind. My pain has value only if it becomes voice. And so I stayed, chained not by wood or stone, but by the relentless demand of memory. The breaking point came when I realized I wasn't alone in this anymore. An old neighbor, someone I'd barely spoken to, paid me an unexpected visit. As he stood in my hallway, his eyes lingered on the half-open secret door. He looked at it with this unsettling familiarity, like a man who already knew exactly what was hidden behind it. In that instant, my stomach dropped. If other people already suspected, then the journals were no longer safe. The conflict was no longer just inside my head. It had become a race against time. Whether I chose to speak or to stay silent, the truth was already starting to stir, and it was quickly moving beyond my control. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey. It means the world. If you're as captivated by this story as I am, please hit that like button and subscribe to follow what happens next. You won't want to miss it. Raphael knew there was no turning back. The house had become a burden, but also a revelation. The journals weren't just confessions. They were echoes of an entire community built on silence and injustice. The question was no longer if the truth should be told, but how. The burden began to shift into purpose. Augusto hadn't left behind a curse, but an opportunity, the chance to give voice to those who had been silenced for too long. In time, Raphael made his choice. He would not sell the records nor bury them again. Instead, he reached out to historians, ethical journalists, and institutions dedicated to preserving memory. Quietly, carefully, he began to share the truth. It was no longer just Augusto's story, but the story of many whose voices had been smothered. The town would have to face its shadows, but this time, with light. The unveiling was not smooth. Accusations flew. Some called Raphael a traitor, a destroyer of reputations. Families denied, raged, resisted, yet there were also tears of relief, gratitude from those who finally felt seen, whose wounds were acknowledged at last. The legacy of Augusto grew stronger than denial. Once truth is spoken, it cannot be erased. Raphael realized he was not the hero of this story. He was merely the bridge, carrying voices across time. The house, once dismissed as ruin, transformed into something sacred. Raphael chose not to rebuild it as a home, but to preserve it as a memorial. The cracked walls remained, the rusted gates still groaned, but inside, life stirred. Visitors came to read the diaries, hear the recordings, and witness the truth. It wasn't a grand museum, but a sanctuary of memory. In their eyes, Raphael saw the same shiver he had felt opening the secret door. Augusto, wherever he was, could finally rest. In the end, Raphael understood. The legacy was not only Augusto's, but also his own. By accepting the burden, he had become part of the story. The town had changed, families were forced to face their scars, and new generations learned the simplest of lessons. Truth may wound, but it frees. Standing before the house at sunset, Raphael breathed deeply and smiled with quiet sorrow. Life would never be the same, but he had honored Augusto's purpose. And with that, he left a message for those who listened. When memory speaks, listen, for from it, justice is born.